Today I am forced to address this once and for all. I'm talking about the position that we get in my new c5 Alliance defense that most people don't know about. That's after e4, pawn to c5, knight f3, and then instead of playing standard boring moves, you just go knight f6. Kind of the Alliance defense, although this is originally called the Nimzowitsch variation, a very interesting and surprise weapon. The intention is not to play the common lines of the Sicilian defense. We are not interested in theory. Now hold on, in my first tutorial video I said pawn to e5 is the top played move. But you know what? That is in the master's database. This is what most people play in over-the-board games. But it is almost equal with the second common move, knight c3. In fact, if I switch over to the Lichess database, you will see that knight c3 is the top played move. When you play knight f6 on the second move, most white players don't know what is really happening. They don't know what you're up to. So they don't want to risk it by going e5, allowing you to do whatever you know. And I showed you guys one interesting gambit that I've never seen anywhere on internet, which can go as follows. After pawn to d4, instead of taking, which is a normal move, you test your opponent's patience by going pawn to b5. My own weird gambit. And the idea is, after bishop takes, you just want to get back that piece in this way with queen a5 check, threatening to take. And you can see in the Lichess database, everyone plays knight c3, which is a blunder due to knight takes, and you end up winning the free bishop. So you're just up a piece in this position. Now back on move 2, the question that begs to be answered comes from Raising Arizona, and it reads, after knight f6, I can see everyone just playing knight c3 and playing a regular open Sicilian. I guess the question is, what are we supposed to do, or how should we continue after knight c3? So what my subscriber is asking is this: after e4, c5, knight f3, and knight f6, most people are playing knight c3, and I agree, that's true. I did cover this line in brief in my first tutorial video, by the way. You should watch that. So this is one line you need to study over and over, especially if you are preparing for a rated tournament game. Most of your opponents are going to be playing this, not that they know what they are doing, but because they are curious, they are in doubt and wondering what you are up to with this Alliance system. So they want to keep you in the Sicilian books. After this, there are actually two opening lines that I would recommend. One is the knight c6 line, and the second one is the pawn to e6 line. And I promise we're not going to be playing the common lines of the Sicilian defense again, because we are not interested in theory. We don't have time for that. You can find the full version of this video on my Patreon page, or simply in the comment section down below. That's where I have included the link. I do this to honor my members who support this little channel financially. If you're not a fan of pawn to e5 and playing that Alliance stuff, or if that seemed to be bulky, try this. Knight c6, kind of the 4 knights game, right? And the plan is very simple. You might need a pen and notebook for this. There are two popular moves that white players will play from here. In fact, 3: bishop b5, pawn to e5, and pawn to d4. Let's begin with e5. This is the simplest of all. Since you don't have knight d5, you want to go knight g4, like what we do in the Budapest defense. If pawn to d4 is played, you simply take, because your main goal is to take back the pawn on e5. That's all, so that you can safely play e6 and d5, or d6 and e5, whichever move order you like. After knight takes, this is when you simply take back on e5. White may be tempted to play pawn to f4 here, but you have knight takes d4. The whole idea is just to have a knight on c6 at the end of the day, regardless of what white does. The queen is under attack, so they play something like queen e4 or queen f2 the last time I checked. And then, since there's already a pawn on f4, e5 won't make sense. That's why we want to play e6, followed by pawn to d5 next. After bishop b5, we can simply go d5, just like I promised. And maybe if queen a4 pressurizing on knight, you go bishop d7. From there, life will continue. Once again, after knight g4, our Budapest move, and white plays d4, you just take. If knight takes, you remember to take back with your g knight. Oh, by the way, if knight takes, you just take back with your knight. That's fine. You can also take back with your b pawn and go d5, because later on you're going to put your knight on g6. All those ideas, you don't have to memorize one line. If bishop f4 is played, d5 is too risky due to knight takes. You're going to lose your d5 pawn. So go pawn to d6. It makes sense because if knight takes, you have knight takes. If bishop b5, putting more pressure on your pinned knight, you simply have bishop d7. And this looks like the perfect defense if you think about it. You might even want to fianchetto your king side and cast a shot, since you have an open c file to attack with your rook. Say knight takes, you can even take back with your b pawn. Again, nothing much to memorize. If bishop takes e5, you want to take the b5 bishop so that white remains with some questions to answer. Next, you are going to develop all your pieces in harmony. After bishop c6, cast a shot and pawn to e6. Why not pawn to e5? In the Sicilian defense, frankly speaking, we want to play pawn to d5, just getting rid of our d6 pawn weakness. Now, once again, after e5 and knight g4, instead of pawn to d4, the main line goes as follows. Queen e2. Now, what do? After queen e2, you still want to get back your e5 pawn, right? So the way you get it back is by playing queen c7. Oh, they are going to play knight b5 attacking your queen, but you have queen b8. This is all theory that I'm showing you guys, and this is the main line that you always want to know. Pawn to d4, as always. You always take on d4. Bishop f4, this is what they play. By the way, you can check in the Masters database once again. They play bishop f4. And now the move you always want to play, which is a theoretical one, is f6. Yes, you can play pawn to e6, but f6 is more matured because they can't take. You're going to take their hanging bishop. They play bishop g3 in most cases, still wanting to take. And now this is when you take back with your g knight. If knight takes e5, you don't even take back with your other knight, you take back with your pawn, and it so happens that you are just up a pawn or up by 2 pawns, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you still have all your pawns, and from here you're going to chase your enemy's piece from your territory first, and then play e6, develop your bishop, cast a shot. So they'll be playing moves like c3, but d6 looks great to me. If pawn takes, this is when I chase the knight. After knight c3, I take on d4 with my other knight, and I have bishop f5 coming. If check, by the way, I have g6, bishop g7, castle short. This is only good for black. Still in the knight c3, 4 knights Sicilian, names of which variation. So we saw what happens if white plays pawn to e5. You just simply think of the Budapest gambit or the Budapest defense, put your queen on b8 and continue with everything that you do. f6 is critical. Instead of pawn to e5, you might see the move bishop b5. With bishop b5, you can still go queen c7. So the plan is still the same. Just like in the knight g4 Budapest line, you always want to play queen c7, right? The other reason why we play queen c7 is to prepare for pawn to e5. By the way, if you are still wondering. For example, if white castles short, here we can play pawn to e5 and seal the deal. Now we are in the e4, e5 stuff with an improved c pawn. If pawn to d3, we go bishop e7. If bishop g5, attacking nothing, we just castle short. If bishop takes, we take back with our bishop. If knight d5, attacking our bishop and our queen, we go queen d8. We're not going to blunder anything. c3, d6, d4, no games in the database. You take back with your c pawn. This, you can oversimplify the game like this if you want, and then pop f4, s6, bishop c4, bishop e6. You want to take, and life continues from here. You will play rook c8, queen b6, rook e8, maybe put your bishop on d5. I don't know. So in all of these variations, even in the b5 line, that's why we put our queen on c7, just to play pawn to e5, given a chance. By the way, castle short is the top played move in both the Lichess database and the Masters database. But if it so happens that they take your knight, this is even better. You take back with your d pawn, you still want to go e5. If white plays e5 themselves, you can just go knight d5. Now back to our Alekhine stuff. This has been played and black has never lost in this position. Oh, sorry, didn't turn on the Masters database. As you can see, all 100% wins. Anyway, if knight takes, you're just doing better. You're going to develop your light squad bishop, play e6 and castle short. By the way, from here, you just have a wonderful game. Again, bishop g4, h3, bishop takes, and queen takes e5. So you're just having a wonderful game. Sometimes after queen c7, Instead of castling short or taking, white may play pawn to d3, another common move. Well, once again, you can just go pawn to e5 if you want to keep everything simple. Going back to the king's pawn game, you will always see them playing bishop g5, but you have bishop e7. If knight d5, this time you can even take on d5 first. If bishop takes, you have knight takes. If ed, first you have queen a5 check, then win the last squad bishop like this. Again, if bishop takes, you have knight takes. You're up a piece. If pawn takes, you have f6. f6 is an important move in this line, by the way. cd, check, bishop takes, bishop c1 to avoid queen takes b2, but you have bishop f5 and maybe castling long will come. It's only black who is better in this position. So we look at the last line now. We have seen what to do after e5. You just go knight g4, then queen c7. Even after bishop b5, you just go queen c7 and think of going e5. But what if they continue with the normal move, pawn to d4? Well, after pawn to d4, it is now straightforward to take and then play pawn to e5. That's if you're interested. If knight takes, you always take back with your b pawn, and this becomes easy to play d5 in the near future. Remember, you always want to get rid of your d6 weakness later in the game. So that will be supported by bishop b7, queen a5, and rook d8. Then think of playing pawn to d5. But after pawn to e5, if they don't take and say they play knight db5 like what they do, well, first you can play pawn to d6. And then after bishop g5, just like I advised in my yesterday's video, you don't play bishop e7 before chasing your enemy's knight from your territory. This is your yard. So this is the only thing you need to remember in the Sicilian defense. Never to entertain white's knight on b5 before playing bishop e7. If you just play bishop e7, they will take, and after you take, and they will play knight d5. Look at this. How are you going to stop this? This is just bad, but it's still playable. So bishop e7 can wait. Always begin by getting rid of the b5 knight first. Once it goes back, that's when you play b5, b4, or simply bishop e7. And I'm sure we looked at something like this in my yesterday's video. If you remember very well, you play bishop e6, get rid of that, castle short, and all that. Sometimes you can even consider playing pawn to b5 before playing bishop e7. I mean, after white plays knight a3, right? So you just go b5 to stop knight c4. If knight d5 comes anyways, this is when you play bishop e7. That's what theory states and allows. Again, if bishop takes, you take back with your bishop. And if pawn to c4, you just ensure that white doesn't have knight c4. So you go b4. This is the typical way of playing the Sicilian defense. In fact, a very safe one. Don't worry about your d6 pawn. It'll be traded sooner or later. Maybe after queen f3, you go bishop e7 first, and say after castle long, you go bishop e6. Point is to take, but this can wait. If you take right away, they are going to reinforce with the other knight, so you go bishop g5, pinning this other knight. If h4, that's when you take, and after fe, you can get rid of that, or castle short first and get rid of this knight. The way you're going to support your d6 pawn is by playing queen c7, and maybe one of your rooks will guard that. So after d4, once again, just take. By the way, e5 is losing now because you have dc, and you're going to reach white's rook faster. If bishop takes, you take back with your e pawn, and you're better. So they will just have to take back, and then you go pawn to e5. Sometimes if you want to play solidly, you can play pawn to e6. And if knight db5, again you go d6. This is the line that we looked at yesterday, where white might play bishop f4, pressurizing your d6 pawn 3 times. And then you go pawn to e5, and then they play bishop g5. What did I say? Again, you don't want to play bishop e7. Due to bishop takes and knight d5, you're going to have some weaknesses. So you first of all chase any knight that is on b5 first, before you continue with your attack. And the way I would start is by pushing pawn to b5. Why pawn to b5? Because I'm getting rid of knight c4 to pressurize my d6 pawn again. You don't want that to ever happen. They will play knight d5 due to b4, and then you go bishop e7, thinking of simplifying. This is the only thing you need to remember or memorize. Chase the knight away from your territory first before continuing with your development. So now we'll look at my second recommendation, pawn to e6, my favorite. With pawn to e6, we are giving white one more chance to reconsider their decision. We still want them to play pawn to e5, the second common move in the master's database, so that if this happens, we can safely go back to our Alekhine system. And this will be great for our eyeballs after knight takes. We'll be glad to take back like this, because to get rid of our d6 weakness, we'll just play pawn to d6 and bishop takes. Clear. If pawn to d4, we don't even bother taking. This is no longer the normal Sicilian defense, so we just develop our knight to c6. See the top games in the Masters database, you guys. What I'm teaching you is what super grandmasters play in a very simple way. The whole point is, if white takes on c5, you simply take back on c5 like this. But say, are we not giving up a free pawn on d5? No. This is simply because we have queen b6, which attacks the f2 pawn, and there's little or nothing white can do to stop us from taking this. If white plays queen d2, well, we can just castle short. If bishop e2 trying to castle short, we take the f2 pawn. If bishop d3, now it's the e5 pawn that suffers. You can play rook e8 immediately, or start with pawn to d6, because you know after pawn takes, you have rook e8 check, an in-between move that may force white to lose their right to castle, because if bishop e2, once again you're gonna take on f2, so white will be forced to play king f1 or king d1 in this position. That's why you go d6 before rook e8, or rook e8 first to win back a pawn. If they play something like bishop c4, again rook e8 saves the day because you are pressurizing the e5 pawn, or again pawn to d6 because you just want to take on e5. That's how you get rid of your d6 weakness. Again, if they take, you have rook e8 check, somehow forcing white to lose their right to castle. This video was sponsored by all of our paid members on Patreon. These are the guys who support Casper Chess financially. In return, we give them extra study materials and other premium content on Patreon to thank them in style. Not to mention that all of our patrons are at liberty to make video requests and ask any chess related questions. You can join free membership and pay later if you want through the link in the comment section down below.